What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and may the 4th be with you. Yes, may the 4th be with all of you, and we're doing some Darth Vader comics. Okay, here's the thing. For those of you guys who don't know about the Marvel Comics Star Wars thing that's going on, basically the way this plays out, or the way this works, is that when Disney got a hold of Star Wars, they wiped away all the old expanded universe stuff, which we might cover if you guys are interested, but things like the Golden Age of the Sith, and like the Force Wars, which are basically like the origin of the Jedi, and some of those stories were cool. In place of it, what Marvel started doing is they started releasing Star Wars comics that tied into the movies. So the first Star Wars line of comics follow A New Hope, and the Darth Vader story follows A New Hope, and then you get this amazing story called Vader Down. But then this one right here, right? This is technically Darth Vader Volume 2, although we're calling it Volume 1 because it's the first story arc in the second volume of Darth Vader. But basically this one follows the events of The Empire Strikes Back. So if you guys remember that Empire Strikes Back movie, that's all you need to know. And so what this does is it initially opens up following the initial encounter between Vader and Luke Skywalker when Vader told Luke Skywalker that he was his father. And as a result of that, it's really him kind of reliving these memories and kind of focusing on it. And of course, in the immediate aftermath of that, Admiral Piet is like, Vader, the Emperor wants to talk to you. And he's like, I got other stuff to do. And he's just like, we got to get out of here. So he ends up grabbing the forensics droid and they basically set off. And it even happens before like Admiral Piet can really contact Vader. Now, the thing about this is that where Admiral Piet tells the Emperor Vader's kind of gone off on his mission, as those of you guys who are familiar with Star Wars know, the Emperor is really more curious than anything else, but he's also kind of all-knowing, right? Whether it's seeing things through the Force or simply having eyes and ears all across the Empire, there's very little that escapes the Emperor's notice in terms of why people are doing things. The other part of this is that with this droid being a forensics droid, Vader, of course, being wildly tech-savvy, ends up reprogramming it and then basically tells it, like, if you ever tell anybody about anything or you reveal anything you've learned on this mission, you will self-destruct, right? And that's basically it. And so following that, the story is a combination of Vader kind of reliving old memories and at the same time going on a mission. And it makes sense in terms of the context. Now, the first place they set off to is ultimately Tatooine because, of course, Vader's looking for Luke Skywalker. But the funny thing about this is the further down this path they go, the more Vader ends up looking into his own past. And so a lot of what this story is designed to illustrate, I would surmise, is that in Return of the Jedi, when Darth Vader turned against the Emperor and sided with Luke Skywalker, that started long before that particular moment. It wasn't like Vader was just like, yes, I see the light now, and then sided with Luke, and then like basically those events unfolded. That seemingly it all started when he first encountered Luke Skywalker in person. And that's really what set him down this path of essentially going back to the light side. What's really told to him by this droid is that, okay, Luke Skywalker, right, like it's the one that Vader wants, and it's like, okay, like he disappeared without a trace. Like we don't know where he went to. But ultimately when Vader's like, we'll find him again, for now, we have to track down everybody who hid him from me and destroy all of them. And so the droid surmises the first and best place to start is Tatooine. Now, when Vader arrives there are some pirates that are kind of hanging out, basically looking to like essentially run up on anybody who's just woeful enough to stow along their path. They will return, these poor bastards. Yeah, like we'll talk about it. We'll get to that point when we get to it. Of course, as you guys know, ever since the Imperial or the Empire itself became aware of Tatooine, really ended up sending initially a search party there. They've always kind of kept a garrison there, right? Just a handful of Imperial guards that basically keep an eye on the place. And it's always, Tatooine's one of those places, if you follow the old Knights of the Old Republic games and the universe surrounding Knights of the Old Republic, Tatooine always had some kind of a garrison there. Whether it was the Republic or you had like Zerka Corporation that operated out of there for a while, or the Empire itself, it's always kind of been a place where people have just resided. And a lot of that is really just kind of bookending the role that people play in Tatooine in terms of the significance of Tatooine, right? Like Tatooine became a huge place because Luke Skywalker came from there in the old school Star Wars films, and the content and in the expanded universe, it's always held a kind of personal place. One of those mainstay locations that exist in the Star Wars mythos. It does have a lot of history. There's a lot that's gone on in Tatooine, but for this particular point, as we know, when it comes to Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, it also holds a significant place to them because he's from Tatooine, or at least that's where he spent most of his life on Tatooine, or the younger years of his life, before he was rescued by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, one thing that I do want to point out here, Darth Vader is currently accompanied by Death Troopers. Let me tell you something, man. You talk to anybody who's ever read anything about Death Troopers, about Star Wars, and they will tell you, man, Death Troopers are legit. If those guys come for your ass, it's curtains. These guys are like the elite guards. I mean, they have like vocal scramblers. These guys are trained in everything, right? Heavy weapons, like melee weapons, unarmed combat. They're basically the personal guards of the most elite members or the highest ranking members of the Empire. Now, I would go as far as to say Darth Vader may not need them, but it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them, right? So again, it is Darth Vader that we're talking about here. One of the cool things about having them there is it almost kind of gives us this more realistic portrayal of Vader, that he's not this all-encompassing, just unstoppable force, that Vader can be defeated, right? It doesn't make him this just, almost godlike being. But when he arrives there, again, he starts experiencing his own memories, right? Where he was talking with his mother, and his mother's like, be brave and don't look back, that kind of a thing. And we also get a little bit of history here. Now, those of you guys who saw episodes 4, 5, and 6, and 1, 2, and 3, this is all stuff that you know. But that's one of the great things about the Darth Vader comics, is it doesn't really reference anything that you haven't seen before. And so this is probably as much a trip down memory lane for you and nostalgia as it is for the character of Darth Vader in the comic. Of course, what we're told is that this was the home of Klieg Lars and Shmi Skywalker, and that after their deaths, the house was inherited by Klieg's son, Owen Lars, and his wife, Beru. And so, of course, we know that when it came to Shmi and all them, they, of course, were the parents of Anakin, essentially, if you want to call it that. Kid was technically born through the Force. And then, of course, you have Owen and you have Beru, who were essentially the adoptive parents of Luke Skywalker. So it's a cool little segment here. But as they go through here, and as Vader kind of relives these memories, of course, it's basically the droid going through, analyzing everything, and finding that there really isn't a whole lot for them to cover here. There really isn't a whole lot for them to find. Now, of course, in the midst of all this, it's like there's no one left. And so you have kind of the graves that are seemingly buried underground. But that's basically it. In terms of the mystery of Darth Vader being able to locate Luke Skywalker, there's nothing here on Tatooine that can bring him that information. And so ultimately, what you end up having are basically these pirates that launch their attack against Darth Vader, and these poor bastards picked the wrong time. It is the droid's like, okay, you can't punish anybody here, but I mean, you can kind of punish them. And so these guys basically show up on what is in effect a pirate mission, and Darth Vader makes it their last one, right? He helps them understand their place in the bigger picture. Literally, when they bombard the whole place, of course Darth Vader doesn't die, and like literally pulls the ships down, right? And then just starts killing everyone. It's amazing. Like, it's nuts. I mean, killing everybody isn't amazing, but it is when Darth Vader does it. And so literally, he just like slaughters everyone here. And then when the droid asks the question, are we done? The response of Vader is no. And so what they end up doing is basically traveling to Coruscant, to what was in effect the apartment of Senator Padme Amidala, right? So again, this is what's so cool. It's a trip down memory lane, because we hadn't really seen reference to this ever since the end of episode 3, right? It was just kind of like, I mean, we assumed it was there, but that's the cool thing, is a lot of the questions that you are likely asking in terms of what happened in the aftermath of Padme's death, of Anakin turning to the dark side, a lot of that stuff gets answered in these comics, which is really, really, really cool. But ultimately, of course, the droid is kind of figuring out what we've already known, right? That like Padme was the mother of Luke Skywalker, and that a Jedi named Anakin Skywalker frequently showed up here. Now, that's one of the things to specify here. No one knows that Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader. Well, precious few people know, right? The Emperor knows, and that's more or less kind of it. And then you also have like Luke Skywalker, who figures it out. But outside of that, no one knows, right? And that's one of the crazy things, because Vader puts together that only the most trusted allies of Padme would have even known that she was pregnant. And those individuals had to have been the ones that took her away from this location to whatever it is that she ended up giving birth. And then in turn, the kids were whisked away from there. So it's basically Vader kind of tracking down the location of everything, right? Figuring out what we as the audience really kind of already know. And then the crazy thing here is, as soon as they make their way past a whole bunch of these crazy looking monsters and whatnot, that they basically end up opening this door. And on the other side of this door is Padme Amidala. Now, here's the thing. I was gonna leave you guys on a cliffhanger. When I was initially reading through this, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna leave them on a cliffhanger. But I'm not going to. Instead, what's really, really cool is that as they get in there, to Vader's eyes, this is Padme, right? And of course, where you would expect maybe some kind of an emotional response, keep in mind, the emotional part of Anakin Skywalker is largely gone, right? I wouldn't necessarily say because he's mostly machine, but because he largely killed that part of himself off as he was falling to the dark side. It doesn't mean that he's not emotional. It just means it's deeply rooted. At the moment, it's just Vader as we know him with maybe some hints of Anakin Skywalker in there. And so that's when the droid kind of analyzes, and it's like, man, like the similarity is astonishing. She seems to be the same age as Senator Amidala would be if she were still alive. Superficial scans reveal a similar bone structure. She even wears Naboo-style field gear. And ultimately, like, the chick's like, why are you here? And that's when Vader's like, no, like, do not shoot at me. Who are you? And she said, like you said it yourself, like, I'm Padme Amidala. And the response of Vader is, no, that is not true. Padme Amidala is dead. I know it. I felt it in the Force. I know for a fact Padme Amidala is dead. So I will ask you one more time, who are you? And that's when the droid basically puts it together and realizes she's one of Padme Amidala's handmaidens. That she's one of those women out there who was designed to look like Padme Amidala to pass herself off in case there was like an assassination attempt or something along those lines. And so that's the cool thing, is that ultimately we end up learning this is Sabe, right? The Queen's double. Now, it's really, really cool because in that moment, that's when Vader says, okay, fine. Like years ago on Coruscant, you broke into Padme's quarters. You wanted to find out what happened to her. What did you learn? Now, this is a really, really important moment because what it shows us and what it really confirms is what we had largely suspected and to a degree kind of knew from the old Star Wars movies or from 1, 2, and 3, that Padme basically kept all of this hidden from even her own handmaids, that nobody really knew what was going on in terms of her and like Anakin, that whole scene with Obi-Wan Kenobi and everything, all that kind of stuff. All of that was largely basically hidden. When she was whisked away, her handmaidens didn't know. And so that's kind of what's been going on, is like they've been literally trying to figure out what it is that happened to Padme Amidala. Now, it was originally a mystery that they intensely dove themselves into in the early days following the collapse of the Republic and the takeover of the Empire. But over the years, I wouldn't go as far as to say they abandoned their quest, but with the Empire's reach being so far, it was really one of those things where it was, we investigate as we try to survive. And that was basically it. Now, at the same time, the handmaiden doesn't fully understand Vader's mission, because where Vader is here and he was like, before she died, she was stolen away, and whoever did that betrayed the Empire, her response is, why would it matter? Like, it was the Empire in the early days. She never would have worked with you, right? It's not like she was an Imperial agent. And that's almost kind of how Vader pitches it to a degree. Not really in so far as saying that's the case, but by framing it in such a way as saying that they betrayed the Empire by taking Padme Amidala away. Again, it seems strange because if anything, the Empire would want Padme Amidala out of the picture. She's one of the last and really significant remnants of the old Republic. And so it's like, you would want her gone. So why would Emperor Palpatine care if Padme Amidala was somehow stolen away from the Empire? I guess maybe unless she had information, but if she had some kind of valuable information, it wouldn't make any difference now because you guys rule everything. Like, you guys have been ruling everything for like 20 years. So what difference does it make, right? And so ultimately it's just kind of like, okay, whatever. They end up kind of seeing eye to eye. And that's when Vader's like, you serve Padme Amidala, you will serve me, because our mission is in effect the same. You want to know what happened to her, and I want to know who took her away. We are in effect looking for the same people. And so ultimately, of course, once they fight off a few more of these monster things, right, and that's basically it, they end up taking off, right? They end up bailing out. Now, one of the things that I want to specify here, and it's one of the things that really is illustrated here in terms of how Vader perceives everything, he knows this woman is not Padme Amidala. He knows that's not the case, but being with her brings back the idea of Padme Amidala. So it's almost like him kind of going through and, to a degree, reliving his own experience, right? It brings him back to really the closest he's been in a long time to being Anakin Skywalker. This is a very dangerous road for Darth Vader to walk on, because this is how fallen Jedi, those who fall to the dark side, end up, how they become Dark Jedi or Sith Lords or what have you. This is how they end up back at the light side, right? Ulukin K. Keldroma is a perfect example of that. That Darth Vader was not the first Jedi to fall to the dark side and go back to the light side again. And this is usually how it happens, kind of bringing themselves back, refreshing themselves on the person they used to be, and using that as an anchor to kind of bring themselves back to the surface from these depths that they've spent so much time in. And so once they travel back to Naboo, this is again a very interesting moment for Vader, because as this happens, he kind of looks around, and these are some pretty fond memories for him. If we're being honest with ourselves, it was in effect the first time that he ever experienced what it was like to be in love, right, with Padme Amidala. It was the first time he had ever really experienced that, and to actually know a life of genuine peace without any real measure of conflict. Because one of the things to remember, in the aftermath of him being a kid and taken away from Tatooine from his mom, Yoda was right when he said, like, this is something that Anakin's not going to be able to get over very, very easily. In fact, he may never get over it at all. That attachment that he had to his mom really remained. Missing her, thinking about her, that really remained. The idea of him missing his mom mom in such a way kind of took a back seat to a degree when he met Padme and began to fall in love with her. And so while I wouldn't say he saw her as like a mother figure, that kind of motherly love transitioned into a romantic love. But when he had those moments with Padme, even though it was weird seeing him frolic through the grass on Naboo, even when he had that moment, it was basically him finding a measure of inner peace that he hadn't necessarily found before. And all that was effectively yanked away, right? His fear that she was going to die during childbirth from those premonitions that he was having basically led him down the path of the dark side. So it's him kind of revisiting this exceedingly positive and beautiful moment in his own history. And that's why I say this story here in particular is really where Marvel and Disney illustrate the idea that Vader was slowly making his way back to the light side again. And so that's kind of the funny thing, because as soon as they enter into those quarters, they're immediately attacked. Now, of course, it's Gregor Typho, and then of course you have Captain Tonra. Now, the guy with the eye patch, you probably remember from the first 3 movies, right? He should look familiar to you all. The guy who doesn't have the eye patch, the white dude, he doesn't really ring a bell, but maybe he should. I don't remember. The artistic rendering doesn't really match at least I can't accurately put him to a face from the movies. But at the end of the day, of course, they're basically here because Sabe had essentially sent out a signal letting them know that like she was arriving here. But as soon as they saw Vader, they thought she was under duress, so that's the reason why they attacked. But the reason they're here is because there was information in the apartment of Padme that was taken by Sabe and sent to a secure location. This location seemingly being where it was at, or perhaps even being moved. But ultimately, that's why they're kind of tracking this down, because now it's no longer about Vader trying to find Luke Skywalker. It's about Vader going down this rabbit hole of Padme. What happened to Padme, right? How did everything go? Because remember, that's one of the things that Vader didn't fully know. That assuming we wipe away everything else in the expanded universe, which this was explained in that, but assuming we wipe away everything from the expanded universe and we focus explicitly on essentially the ending of episode 3, and then we go into this, that he felt Padme die, and the explanation given to him by the Emperor is that essentially Vader himself, or Anakin himself, had been the one to essentially kill her. That at the end of the day, his response was, no, she was alive when I left her. Like she was fine when I left her. And so he never fully believed the Emperor when he said, you're the reason Padme died. That there had to be something else that was going on there. And again, this is him kind of trying to find an answer to that question. And so of course, as they're making their way, underwater in Naboo, they're attacked by some underwater creatures. Like that's gonna stop Darth Vader. Dude literally busts out his lightsaber and annihilates them. And then they end up in one of these little underwater bubbles in Naboo. And of course, they end up finding what's basically a shrine, or a kind of Gungan construction that really illustrates the tribute to the alliance that Padme had formed in the wake of like the Trade Federation invasion. So if you guys recall from episode 1, when Padme had basically orchestrated an alliance between the Gungans and the Republic, right? That this is really a tribute to that, right? So just really great callbacks to episodes 1, 2, and 3, which were always really cool. And so once they end up locating the missing surveillance data from Padme's apartment, this is when you end up finding out the surveillance data is actually Sabe from shortly after what was believed to be, or at least what was, the death of Padme Amidala. And she literally says, like, tonight we start calling ourselves the Amidalans, and together we pledge to find whoever murdered our queen and kill them all. So we swear. And that's when Vader realizes it's a trap. He's like, explain yourselves. And they're like, we told you, Vader, the last time we saw Padme, she was heading to Mustafar to find Skywalker. Years later, we learned that Mustafar was your domain. You killed them. Again, they haven't put together the fact that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. Remember, no one really knows that. And so that's literally when they launch an attack, or at least intend to launch an attack. They send off this kind of signal that brings in just like this Sora Aqua beast, right? Just like this enormous beast that, as far as they're concerned, it's the only thing that's capable of destroying Darth Vader. Of course, he ends up basically falling into its mouth alongside the droid. But let's be honest, as gigantic as this creature is, it's not going to destroy Darth Vader. And in fact, it doesn't. That while the droid basically specifies that there is nothing on the record books that indicates a way to kill these things aside from another one of them, Vader is Darth Vader and literally kills it, because, none of us would honestly believe that Darth Vader could actually be killed by a sea monster. And so he wins. And the droid's like, congratulations, Vader. You're the first one to accurately, or at least to exist on record, to have destroyed one of these giant beasts. So it's kind of a cool little moment, right? But nothing major or significant here. But following that, they end up traveling to Theed, the capital city of Naboo. And as soon as they arrive there, they're met by all these Amidalans, right? And it's just like, we sentence you to death for the murder of Padme, Queen and Senator of Naboo, and General Anakin Skywalker, her Jedi protector. And that's when Vader's like, did you know them? And he says, yes, we fought side by side when the Trade Federation invaded. And that's when you realize this guy who's talking is actually the older gentleman that was initially explaining how the Naboo Naboo fighters work to Anakin Skywalker. So again, great callbacks to those old school films. It's one of the reasons why I love the Darth Vader stories from Greg Pak. Now, of course, these guys are all idiots, right? Like launching an attack against Darth Vader, come on, it's never going to work. And it doesn't. It doesn't work. Like literally he goes through and just starts attacking everybody. Now, for the most part, Vader himself just kind of deviates and does his own thing. And the Death Troopers are really the ones that take out most all of those people. But that's what's kind of crazy is that Darth Vader essentially killed the guy that he initially, that taught him how to use a Naboo fighter, right? These close connections that Vader has, he kills them all. But one of the things that I want you guys to notice is that as this happens, right, as Vader recognizes people from his past or as he kills people from his past, I want you to kind of notice the expression that's given here. Now, as far as Vader, it's just a helmet. But if you watching the Star Wars film, you also know there's a little bit behind there. And that's the cool thing is as Vader does this, he realizes he's killing his own past off. And as he does that, he brings himself back to his past self just a little bit, right? Brings himself a little bit closer, brings back that connection, that part of himself that he for so long thought was basically gone, that Anakin is slowly making his way to the surface. And so following that, of course, you end up having the Amidalans, basically the handmaidens themselves, who all step up with the intention of taking out Vader. We, of course, know they won't, and Vader himself doesn't really even want to kill them, right? I mean, initially he kind of, starts, fending off their attacks, but it's more of a defensive measure than anything else because he could kill them all with a swiftness if he wanted to, right? Literally, force choking, throwing his lightsaber around. I mean, these girls would all be annihilated in moments if Vader chose to kill them, but he doesn't. Now, he does use force choke on seemingly all of them, but then he ultimately just lets them go because it's like, I have no desire to kill any of them. Right now, of course, at the tomb of Padme Amidala, he does find that little artifact that he crafted for Padme when he was a little kid to ensure that she never forgot about him. But at the end of the day, once he cracks open the tomb and he makes his way in, that you initially have Sabe who comes running in and is like, no, you can't do this, right? You can't break in here. You cannot desecrate this tomb. And instead of him doing it, the droid scans the whole thing and basically says, yeah, okay, there's a med implant that was stamped here. She's not in this tomb, right? She's not here. Now, once the droid kind of analyzes and is like, okay, she is technically here, or at least it seems like she's here. I mean, there's no reason to believe that she wouldn't be. Vader can't really bring himself to look at the body of Padme. And in fact, he can't even really bring himself to desecrate the tomb of Padme. Again, that Anakin personality kind of rising to the surface, and the fact that he doesn't want to desecrate the grave of the woman he loved. And so there's a medical implant that's there, which basically traces them back to where it was that Padme was at when she essentially gave birth to Luke and to Leia. And so this starport control, of course, it was a rebel base that was previously discovered by the Empire and was basically just destroyed, right? Or at least seemed to be destroyed. It was basically bombed. So the whole place wasn't annihilated, but everybody who was in there was either killed or maybe escaped. But as they're going through, they realized, just from the computer systems, that there was a Naboo J type starfighter or star skiff that was transporting Padme Amidala, and there were two droids on there alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that's when, as the droid is looking at this and analyzing, of course, you have basically the Amidalans that launch a secondary attack. Now, with Darth Vader having his Death Troopers at his side, they basically launch an attack from the side, right? Like quite literally just kind of catching them off guard. And that, for the most part, takes out most all of the ships. Those individuals who do make it to the surface, Vader takes them out as well. But this really is a ragtag bunch. That's one of the things that I really want to specify here. The Amidalans are not really an organized military force. If anything, they're a militia, following the ideologies or following the namesake of Padme Amidala and bent on the idea of trying to get revenge on whoever it was that essentially killed her, right? So think of them as like one step down from the Rebel Alliance in effect. But of course, all these guys are basically taken out by Vader, and it's done pretty brutal, right? It's a pretty brutal way. Like, he really spares nobody. But as all these forces are taken out, this just leaves Vader, the Death Troopers, and the droid, and they end up making their way to a maternity ward. And Vader asks, like, what do the records say? And the response of the droid is, the data core's been destroyed. There are no records here. There's nothing to tell us what happened. So this is the explanation, even as part of this journey, why it is Vader was not able to easily figure out that Padme had given birth to Luke and Leia and where they had been taken to. The only records that really exist in the first place is the maternity droid that was helping Padme give birth to Leia and Luke in the first place. The droid, recognizes it's exceedingly damaged, but part of their memory bank still appears to be intact. And basically what it gives them is this holographic depiction of Padme on the table, seemingly after both kids are born. and it really, and the first words you hear are what are basically Obi-Wan. And that's when the droid's like, that name again, like we've been hearing that name, that person must have been very important to her. And Vader almost kind of takes it as an affront, right? Because remember, Vader has a hatred towards Obi-Wan. And a lot of this is really rooted seemingly in the skewed perspective of the dark side. That remember in like the third movie, he like literally looked at Padme and he was like, you were with him. More so than that, he sees Obi-Wan as basically the one who turned Padme against him in the first place. That Anakin legitimately believed he could get Padme to rule the galaxy alongside him and they could kill the Emperor. It was a pretty twisted perspective that Anakin had, but him being really the only one there witnessing this while the Death Troopers stand outside, that the hologram basically says there's still good in him. Like, I know that there's still good in him. And so in effect, this is really where the seeds are initially planted, and the fact that Anakin's still in there somewhere. He's not as easily accessible, right? He's not as much to the surface as we previously thought there was, but he's still in there. And this is what sets the stage for ultimately Luke Skywalker being able to bring that Anakin part of him out during Return of the Jedi. The real question you have to ask here is, what happens when the Emperor realizes what it is that Darth Vader has been doing? Because literally, he makes his way back to the Emperor. And when he gets there, the Emperor's like, have you settled your business? And the response of Vader is, yes. And the Emperor says, really? Have you now? Right? The Sith know that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to strength. But you, my friend, have just wallowed in grief. Now you have to start all over again, Vader, with fear. And this is when the Emperor starts conjuring Force lightning, and he unleashes a pretty unholy punishment on this guy. It's an amazing story. It's like a little two-part story. It's phenomenal. But he unleashes hell on this guy. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know if you want to see more Darth Vader, and I will catch you all later. Peace.